Just one moment. It seems like the last year or so of online engagement has still not not yet helped me.
Over the last 3 years, the GRACE project has worked towards spreading and embedding responsible research and innovation in the European research area. 6 research funding and performing organisations around Europe have been selected to each develop a set of specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound grounding actions to achieve institutional change with visible short-term impacts. A selection of these grounding actions has been structured into 8-year roadmaps towards RRI for each organisation, paving the way to attain further and more complex institutional changes in the long run. Grounding actions covered key policies such as ethics, open access, public engagement, gender equality, science education, and governance. What also makes GRACE noteworthy is its approach. 6 expert partners supported the 6 implementing organisation in a co-creative and mutual learning environment. Mutual learning workshops and regular mentoring meetings proved to be an efficient new way of learning. A reflection tool helped implementing organisation to define the vision, goals, and means to implement each action. This tool is available on the project website and can be used by any small group when developing RRI-focused institutional change actions. To ensure effective impact, the project's actions were continuously assessed through a specific evaluation scheme, whereby participants improve their practices by conducting their own evidence-based evaluation in an ongoing process. Find out all about GRACE's RRI actions and tools on our website.
With that as a background, as you can guess, Excite has been working with different implementing organizations on the topic of public engagement. And if we are asked to define what this is, let's just say that there have been many definitions and ours is just one of the many, but we try to share here with you some of the things that were important as we were going through the GRACE project. For us, public engagement really encompasses the myriad of ways in which the activity and benefits of research can be shared with the public, and in particular, acknowledging and integrating different forms of knowledge, treating citizens as partners and engagement as a two-way process, and really as striving for input and influence at different stages of the research and innovation process. There are many, let's say, goals, and they can perhaps be summed up broadly as improved relations and outcomes in collaboration between science and society. But of course, this can take many forms. So if we just take a fellow project in the field, we notice opportunities for improving the connections between researchers and citizens in particular, the identification of priority research questions, even going as far as the co-design of scientific solutions that are closer to societal needs and concerns. So we know that these benefits exist out there. We have, of course, research and evidence to support that. And nevertheless, we still felt throughout the GRACE project that this challenge remained, namely that of demonstrating this value and developing trust and commitment from different kinds of actors about different kinds of activities. So in particular, today, we would like to shine a little light on researchers, the public, and management and leaders which shape the strategic orientation of research performing organizations. Having said that, the disclaimer is, of course, that not all researchers, members of the public, or management and leadership groups, of course, are the same, but we just use these broad categories to structure the discussion that we're going to have today. And we will do that with the help of three great speakers. Our first thanks of many already for joining us for today. And the plan is as follows. They will each take the floor for 10 minutes. They've asked us to be quite strict with the timekeeping so that we can leave plenty of time for discussion at the end of the event. The order will be as follows: Laureen, followed by Mattia, and last but not least, Maud. We'll have a little time to have hot reactions to each other's presentations and to hear about the most, let's say, the key takeaway message that they'd like to stress for the audience. And then, of course, we'll open the floor to your questions. We'll end with some final notices about upcoming opportunities in the GRACE project. So without further ado.
So Lorraine, after working for many years in the theater field and in Science Center, you are now in your final year of PhD. So today you will be sharing with us your insight from investigating the implementation of a public engagement culture within the innovative training network Europa. So how do researchers conceive the value of public engagement, and what impact does it have on their practices? The floor is yours, Lorraine.
Hello everyone, sorry, yes, perfect. So I don't know, I will have to ask you for a slide. Yeah, there is a stupid effect in the beginning. If you can just press the, so everything comes. Perfect, thank you very much. So hello everyone, I'm Lauren Chailan. So I'm doing my PhD in education at the University of Bristol. So I'm going to talk to you about the public engagement on the researcher's point of view. So in this presentation, I will have really a particular focus on early stage researchers. First, because statistically they are the ones that tend to take more part in public engagement activities, but also because they are the ones that will shape the research culture tomorrow. So this presentation will be a mix of information coming from published research in the field and insights coming from my own PhD research that is not yet published. Can I ask you to go to the following slide, please? My PhD is an ethnography of the Europa network, the network that also funds my research and which I am a part of. It's a European network that gathers 16 PhD students in 6 European countries, and they are all the others are working in astrophysics and astrochemistry. And this network has taken a very particular stance because they have been making public engagement completely compulsory for all the PhD students that are a part of it, and especially in this kind of science field, it's quite unusual. And they also have involved an internal partner with a science communication consultancy who has been collaborating with the PhD students. I will, before going to the heart of my topic, I just want to give you a few numbers from a report that was done in the UK in 2017 about the hidden economic value of public engagement in the UK. I found it quite informative. So it's over a year in the whole country. They have found out that public engagement in universities represent 40 million hours of work, of which 28.6 million hours were performed by academics, which is huge, really. And it's not a little hobby. It's not like something that you do on the side, you know, on top of the rest, as it's often presented. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of money. So you see all the numbers in the presentation. I will give a link to this report because I think it's really interesting. Can I ask for the next slide, please? Yeah. So if you look at the literature, most of the time, so the two big strands of motivation for researchers to engage are first, personal growth, personal taste. You want to learn new skills, you want to have fun, break from daily routine, you just like engaging with people. The other big category of motivations is moral duty. There is this idea of giving back to the taxpayers, of promoting your research, of promoting your field, and creating a spark for your discipline, informing young people about career paths, opportunities. There is also this notion of being a role model. And this is something that you will find more among people who are from a background that is in minority in academia, women in science, but also non-white people, people that come from a working class background. They tend to have a stronger sense of moral duty and the importance of being out there and representing and showing that people from their background can be researchers. And so there is this idea of fostering more social inclusion. But as you can see, it's a very individually led, individually rewarded activity. And actually all these motivations amount to nothing if they are not accompanied with an enabling environment. Great, thank you very much. For the next slide. So the enablers that are external, so of course they can be the local culture of research, the commitments of the institution, the fact of having official recognition or reward. In Europa, I mean, it might seem blunt, but like really, we had to commit to a certain number of public engagement activities and then to report about it and then to take part in, institutionalized events. And I mean, in some fields, most researchers don't want to do it at first. So that's why this kind of external motivators are really interesting. And they have good reasons for not wanting to engage. We will go into it in the next slide. And an interesting thing that, sorry, can you just come back because I'm not finished with that. Sorry. An interesting thing that a lot of papers know is that a very strong enabler is actually a past experience, because once they've done it, most of them want to do it again. And another enabler that we talk a lot of course, is training, which it's great in terms of building self-confidence. But also public engagement is something that cannot really be learned in a lecture room. It's something that you have to do in order to learn it, really. And again, in Europa, we had several opportunities that were really interesting of learning in a social context. So you have a group of early stage researchers participating in a public engagement activity together. Some of them are not experienced at all. Some of them have a little bit more experience. And it's an apprenticeship process, really, where you observe, you imitate, you gradually enter the process of participating while socializing with peers. And this context of social learning is really, really important. So thanks. For the next slide, please, about the barriers. So we've talked about isolation, perceived lack of skills. We're talking about early stage research. So of course, professional and financial instability is something that can prevent you from being available for engagement. I want to talk again a little bit more about the Europa context, because it's interesting. In this network we are funding under the Marie Sklodowska-Curie scheme, which asks you to go in another country to do your research. So basically, most of the people in this network didn't talk the local language in the country where they were positioned. And it's a huge problem, because it cuts you from the local environment. And it means that you will only have access to a certain categories of publics that are the ones that speak English. And academic mobility is a very strong value in academia. And it sometimes can completely clash with the fact of creating a public engagement culture. And there are other things in the academic culture that clash with the values of public engagement. If you think about it, the whole context of excellence also harbor a tacit culture of exclusion in certain ways. And young researchers, they get a lot of ambiguous and contradictory messages, because on some side you have all these encouragement from funders, from institutions to engage, and on the other side you have to deal with the professional stigma that can be attached to public engagement in a lot of fields. You have to deal with the disapproval of the supervisors as well. And all these contradictions, all these ambiguities, they weigh on the shoulders of the individual, of the early stage researchers as a person. It's not carried by the institution, it's carried by the person. And this is a huge problem, actually. And it's something that we really have to think about when trying to implement incentives for engaging. So can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. So on the brighter side, if we take a look at the benefits for researchers that participate in public engagement activities, of course, you learn tons of new skills. And it's not only, so communication skills are really important for researchers, and we all know that. But it's not only a communication skill that you learn, because when you do public engagement, you also learn to collaborate. You learn to understand other people's work in a different way. You also have the occasion to replace your research in a broader context, something that you tend to forget when you are on your specialist activity, on your day-to-day research routine. And you also, a lot of the time, tend to forget how much interesting your research is, how much important it is. And sometimes participating in public engagement activities is also something that will make you excited about what you do again. And this is, so beyond all the communication, collaboration skills that you learn, there is also, of course, this well-being aspect that is really important and that should be more important in academia in general. But there is also an emotional experience, something that makes you realize how emotional work also is something that benefit to your work, benefit to your work, to your research, to your experience of knowledge production.
Sorry to interrupt, you have 1 more minute.
Okay, great, that's perfect. I'm almost finished, so I'm very happy. It's something, so yeah, I was talking about the emotional work that is an important dimension of public engagement, and that is also an important dimension of research, and it's something that we need to acknowledge more in academia. So in Europa, it was really interesting by discussing with these young researchers. They also realized how much participating in public engagement activities made them create more bridges between their intimate identity, between their personal identity and their academic identity. And again, I am quite convinced that is something that is extremely valuable to research culture in general. So to conclude, really, apart from something that for me is really important, is this idea of paying attention to how institutional dynamics and how institutional requirements can weigh on the individual. There is also really this idea that public engagement could actually be a part of creating a better culture of research, a culture of research that is more attuned to emotional intelligence and to the fact paying attention to the individual. And in this world of casualization and of where we tend to, at the same time, create more and more demands to researchers, And at the same time, we want to foster more social inclusion. I think it's something that should be a part of creating the research culture of tomorrow.
Thank you, Lauren. Now, let me introduce you, Marcia. So you are the CEO and co-founder of Sticky Dot, a Brussels collective working on pushing public engagement in science further. Today, you are bringing insight from 2 EU-funded projects that on what it takes to involve public deeply in a local participation and co-creation. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me see if I can share my screen. I hope you see the presentation in the right way. Before I share with you, so thank you very much for having me today. Before I share with you these examples that were just mentioned, I just wanted to contextualize a bit the type of public engagement I focus on. So it was very interesting for me to listen to Lauren's presentation, because I often do work with researchers and try to involve them in public engagement activities. And it is really challenging. Of course, from my point of view, I often see the added value of being involved in such processes, but I can totally understand the challenges and the fear sometimes that comes with having to be part of this type of processes. So I hope these examples I will share today will be useful to maybe understand better what to expect. I think there are various types of public engagement that can be performed, and the type I personally focus on my activities. It's something that can take different names. If you have been involved a bit in European projects, but not only, it's something that is becoming very fashionable, I would say, in a lot of fields. You might have heard about multi-stakeholder engagement, co-creation, co-design. They are really becoming buzzwords that you can read a bit everywhere. Maybe even recently, if you have been applying for research goals, you might see something like this mentioned in the call. So what does this mean concretely, what it is that I do? What I do is try to engage citizens, but not only, also other type of societal actors, and I will give you some examples, in participatory processes, which lead to some kind of concrete impact on the research and innovation themselves, or on the policies that govern research and innovation. How do I do this? Mostly through some really nice workshops that involve the use of very nice interactive tools to make people work together. A few reflections also on my side of why do I think that this is beneficial. First of all, I'd like to mention that in my experience, in my personal experience, this type of processes can be beneficial to all fields of research and innovation. There has been a lot of debate in the past whether citizen engagement is not so relevant, for example, for basic research, while it's more adequate for applied research. And whether there are disciplines where this is more relevant than others. In my view, at least in my experience, it can be beneficial at all stages, everywhere in every field. Of course, it needs to be performed, it needs to be done in a way that it makes sense. It cannot be the same everywhere. It is particularly useful at initial stages of research and innovation, what is often called prototyping or the idea generation, because it can really bring in thoughts and views that can really have a strong impact on how the research and innovations take shape. And the same goes for governance processes. What does it bring to the table? So what happens when you do citizen engagement? Often what happens is that you identify unforeseen impacts. It is normal to be strongly focused on the research and innovation itself, and more difficult to sometimes imagine how it will work once it becomes something that exists out there in society, or something that is talked about by by other people that are not just the researchers themselves. It also increases transdisciplinarity. It allows to have a taste of the collective intelligence that exists around a specific field, topic, domain, object, etc. And in general, what it does is also that it brings a stronger contribution to the public good, so that scientific advancements are better aligned with what is really needed within society. So these are, I won't read them all as I just have a short time, but these are some examples of societal engagement processes I've been involved in. And as you can see, they can really be started by different actors. It can be private companies, it can be researchers, it can be citizens themselves. But also, this is something that I will focus a lot, is about funding agencies, so those who support research and innovation. And all these actors might see the need for interacting with other stakeholders at a certain stage in their ideas, in their development. And there is always an added value for each of these processes listed here. These are real cases that I've been working on. If I had time, I would show you the added value that came from these interactions. But I will focus on two examples today very quickly. One is from a project that is called Transform. In case you would like to have a look, here is also the link to the website. Is a project that is strongly focused on territorial development. So for each of the locations that you see mentioned on this map, there is actually a local regional government involved. So specifically those agencies within the government that support research and innovation at a regional level. And what we try to do here is to really try to introduce new forms of citizen engagement within the decision-making processes. So these agencies, how can they better involve society in the way they support research and innovation? I know it sounds a bit abstract, so I will tell you the case of Brussels, which is also the city where I live. In Brussels, the partner we have involved is called Innoviris, which is actually the regional agency funding research and innovation at the regional level. So this is a very interesting case because this agency is actually funding a huge variety of, it has a huge variety of funding programs. It's really quite impressive. They even have a funding program that is called Co-Create. So they are actually already focusing on involving different type of actors within the projects that they finance, but they do so only in a very specific area. So this co-creation funding program and other very few funding programs allow for multi-stakeholder engagement. Most of their funding programs are just focused on traditional support to research and innovation. So what we did at the beginning of the process with them is that we worked a lot to identify how we could mainstream these elements of citizen engagement into further processes. And I think the reactions we had at the beginning were quite similar to the reactions that Lorraine, you could see at first. Of course, there is some kind of overwhelming feeling and also fear because, of course, you can imagine decision makers being really busy and not really maybe having time to work on this. But then what we did is to focus on a real case, and this is what we are doing currently. We are piloting some real cases so that they could see hands-on what is the added value there. This is the case of two innovators belonging to a local university here in Brussels who think they have come up with a really interesting critical innovation, as we call them, in the field of circular economy. That's what we are focusing on in Brussels. Of course, this innovation is basically a type of sensor capture that can tell you a lot of things about the quality of the water, for example, tap water at home. So Brussels has quite a huge issue with people still not drinking tap water and still consuming a lot of bottled water. So the assumption of these innovators was that this captors, once available in the market, would probably make a big difference, and lots of people would stop buying bottled water, and they would actually use more tap water once they could see themselves on this sensor that the quality of the water was good and safe. So we ran some citizen engagement workshop with them. We're at a very early stage here where this innovation doesn't exist yet. It's still taking shape. And it was extremely interesting for these innovators to see that it's actually not the case, because there are lots of other things that take a huge role in the fact that people don't consume tap water, such as, for example, taste. If you don't like the taste of something, you will still not drink it, even if you are 100% sure that it's safe. If you see that there is a lot of that this water is really hard and heavy, and you have concerns about your health, you will still not drink it, even if a sensor tells you that it's safe. So starting from that, we started a really interesting process leading to a stronger citizen uptake, leading to to envisioning new ways of using this innovation in the future. So we're not saying, of course, this innovation should not exist, but we are trying to envision together ways with an active role and empowerment role of the citizens that could lead to some kind of impacts thanks to this innovation. And this is what we are doing with the Brussels region. So setting up agile processes which can support innovators and researchers to do this kind of citizen engagement activities in a very agile way, so that it doesn't stop the research and innovation process to go on, but it also brings some really interesting food for thoughts for them in the way forward. I know my time is over probably, but just one.
We still have 1 minute.
Okay, so the other interesting example I'm working on is called Mosaic, and it's actually focusing on, you might have heard about these European missions that are being launched. The European Commission has decided that we definitely have to achieve some targets by 2030. One of them being at least 100 cities in Europe being climate neutral and smart cities. This is a huge challenge. I think some of you maybe work in the environmental field. Being climate neutral by 2030 is really a huge challenge. And there is a lot of attention from the European Commission on involving citizens and communities within this process. So in this project, we're actually providing support to these cities to perform co-creation in the way of achieving these missions that actually involves all the people that should be involved, including citizens and, of course, researchers and the private sector. Just a very last list of food for thoughts that we are working on in Mosaic. What we are seeing is that the methods should really be strongly dependent on the topic, on the scale, on the funding available. There is absolutely no one size fits all. All the list of examples I brought to you every time I have developed a tailored approach that worked in that specific context. So this is really important that you work with professionals that know how to set this up. There is a richness of tools and know-how available from EU-funded projects, but not only. It's very important that you focus on meaningful engagement. So there needs to be something in the process for everyone. I think from Lorraine, we heard some really interesting thoughts on what can be in there for the researchers. And it was really interesting for me to hear this. And what I also focus on is what is in there for the public, for the citizens that is involved in this process. And one way to make it meaningful to everyone is to try and achieve concrete impacts. So that it's not just just talking and collecting suggestions, but really trying to make things change. And for this is really important that all the key actors are involved from the start. And I will stop. That's it from me. Thank you
so much, Marzia. I think that's a great message to end on. What's in it for me as a citizen. We would like now to give the floor to our third and final speaker, Maud, you are the head of Public Programs Department at the Center for Science Communication and Culture at the University of Utrecht. And with the university, you have been on a journey to embed public engagement in the core of the university strategy. So we'd love to hear from you how you made the case for that as a professional. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks all for being here. Thank you very much for having me. Yes, indeed, I'm leading a department, of public programs department in our university. It's a department with about 16 people, and I'm also one of the track leaders, and I will talk about that a little more, for the public engagement track in our university's Open Science program. I think a term that we have not heard explicitly before, but links to many of the things that we have already been talking about. My own personal background is in medical anthropology. I did a PhD in science and technology studies, but over this past 15 years or so, I've been working in public dialogue, research management, action research, also patient participations for a few years. And I would like to share some thoughts about how we have been putting public engagement closer to the center of the university's strategy and policy. So I need more of an academic, organizational perspective in this discussion. Well, actually, the first time that public engagement as a concept came up in the university's strategy was 5 years ago. Of course, it was a known term, but 5 years ago, it popped up as a term in the university strategic plan. So it was in 2016. And that was initiated by the Center for Science Communication and Culture, where I also worked already then. For your information, this center actually has 3 parts. One is our university museum, who is also a member of Excite. So our university has its own museum, of course, collecting academic heritage, connecting that to current research for a general audience. That's one part. Then we have the Culture Center. I will not talk about that today. And then we have the Public Programs department that I'm heading. That used to be called Studium Generale, a strange term for many of you, I guess. But that was and still is a very extensive program of public program of lectures, festivals, discussions for students, but open for everyone. And since this year, this department has been expanding, and we are now also hosting some other public engagement activities, amongst which is a very interesting one is the Science Hub, which is doing a lot of projects connecting science to primary schools. So that is the Center for Science Communication and Culture. In that strategic plan 5 years ago, public engagement was already linked to what was then not called open science yet, but it was a bit hinted at because it was mentioned in relation to the ambitions in the field of open access publishing, data sharing, and then in a third paragraph, it said, well, that also means sharing more of our work with the public. And then it said that is public engagement. So 1 year after that, a program started in our center to explore a bit more what was already going on in the field of public engagement, not just in our center, but also outside, with a focus on the conditions, and also with a strong focus on support, the need for support, how to support researchers in doing public engagement, and also focus on support staff. Well, our notion of public engagement there was really very much on the general public, so on citizens, people who are not already have a very clear stake in science or in research. Public engagement is very much about interactivity, about dialogue, not just sharing the results, but also having conversations and interaction and input for research, and also citizen science is part of public engagement for us. And very much at the core of our vision is that engagement with research is a democratic right for every citizen. So it's a right in itself, and also research, engaging with research can be a way to support people in using their democratic rights. That's very much at the core of how we think about our programs. Well, then in 2019, and now I will share my screen. 2019. Do you see my screen now? Yeah. We had the start of the Open Science program that I was already talking about in our university. And this program is made up of 4 tracks. And you see one of those is public engagement. It's much broader. It's about open access publishing, fair data, and also the discussion about how to reward. And here it's this incentive, but it's now recognized, reward and recognize academic work. But the whole idea behind it, as you see in this picture, is that the idea of open science is to improve the interaction and actually the co-creation between science and society. Oh, no, I don't see that one. So that started in 2019, but the notion of public engagement in that program, it was much broader than this focus on citizens. So it's also about stakeholder engagement. It's about co-creating with societal organizations, public or private. In line with this program, our center, the Science Communication Center, has also initiated a follow-up on that first plan that we had, and we are continuing some of the activities that we were already doing. There's a seed fund where researchers can, especially also early stage research, but it is for everyone, can apply for small sums of funding, and if they do that, and if they get awarded, they also get help or training for their activities. Training, coaching, advice is part of the work of the center, and also what I heard in Laurent's talk as well, the importance of sharing experiences, sharing the lessons learned. That's an important role for a center there in all kind of ways, including network meetings, network events, of course, websites. And then we now also have a very explicit job in initiating collaborations across the university for new kind of public engagement projects, for new audiences, for people that we are not reaching so much yet as a university. And the focus in this is not so much on reaching more people, but perhaps on reaching more different people, and very much a focus on quality, and also evaluating that quality. Part of the Open Science program is a public engagement channel network. And this includes researchers, there are about 45 members, fellows now, but also members of the support staff. And this is part of my work for the Open Science program. I'm the coordinator of that network. And my director, she is also, of course, involved in leading this public engagement track. She focuses more on the policy and on all the kind of governance kind of stuff. And I focus on the involvement and building a community of researchers across the whole university to actually be engaged. But we invite some of those people. We have also had an open call. There's snowballing going on, and it's still expanding. The purpose of that is exchange among themselves, community building, agenda setting, but also shaping a shared vision and message, really with grounded in academic practice. You see that on this on this picture. That is just not has officially been launched yet, so I don't share it yet. But this is something that is a fellow network has also been involved in thinking about how do we get the message across in the university, and this is made to show that we are already doing a lot of engagement, science communication, co-creation. So that's at the left, in the past, the present, and there is already a lot of interaction between science and society. But by connecting this to this open science movement, we can manage to make this more of a collective field of work. So stakeholder engagement, citizen science, science communication, co-creating with society partners, it's all part of public engagement. So it's one of the results of this network. Another result will come. Yeah.
But sorry to interrupt. You have 1 more minute.
Yeah, I will make that. Another result will come out soon. That's a position paper that the fellows are also writing, and there are more activities coming up. But to wrap up, and also to answer the question that how do we, or did we make the case for public engagement? I think the combination of the hands-on public engagement expertise of our center and our involvement in the strategy and policy at university level is actually what seems to work very well for us. And then this whole movement of open science was kind of the boat that we jumped on, or the train that we jumped on, which is not so much opportunistic. Yeah, of course, it's also opportunistic, but it also makes sense because open science is so much about the improvement of science for the benefit of society. At least that is how our board of university also wants to see it. So that's a great opportunity for us to be very close to the strategy. And we are allowed to do that because of the credibility we have, because we know what we're talking about. We are actually organizing events. We have this museum. And so I think that's an interesting thing. And probably, yeah, and then of course the involvement of, well, these new academic leaders. So we are connecting at different levels in the university, which gives us a lot of room to not just do public engagement, but also make this a collective story. Of course, there are also some challenges because navigating academic and public and managerial logic and credibility, it can be pretty challenging. But if you want to know more about that, please ask me any questions about that. And, thank you for attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maud. And I think as a next step, and you've already begun to do that in your different presentations, reflecting on each other's, let's say, positions and building connections with what the other speakers have said. So yeah, already make my task much easier because I wanted to invite you to, let's say, after hearing each other's presentations, to have your quick reaction about the perhaps one point that you share as speakers or from one particular presentation that you think is worth emphasizing to our audience. And I'm going to put perhaps Marcia first on the spot to reflect a little bit in a couple of minutes about what you have heard more broadly and the patterns you can see perhaps.
Yes, happy to do so. And maybe at the same time, I can also take advantage to answer. I was just reading also a question that just appeared in the chat that I find really interesting. I think there is a lot of common ground between the presentation that we have given, and I think there are lots of points of connection, and we would definitely benefit a lot from more interactions on these as we all tackle similar challenges in different environments. There is a really good point that comes up in the comment from Indrani. There is a huge debate around the use of the word citizen in this field. I have to confess that I use it a bit by default as I work a lot on EU-funded initiatives. And this is the narrative that is used a lot by the European Commission. So citizen engagement, citizen science are now big buzzwords, as I was saying before. But there is indeed a huge debate around this, whether citizen is the best word to use in this case. I agree with you that it can be definitely not inclusive. Is of course it will not make people like immigrants feel part of these activities. So I don't have an answer for this, but I also wish that it was called something different. That's why I often use the word community engagement, or I think public engagement is also good, a good way of framing it. There is definitely an issue if we look at something like citizen science that you might have heard of, that is a methodology for engaging participants that has become very fashionable recently. There are lots of studies showing that most of the participants are indeed young male people, so that there is a huge issue of inclusivity there. Even in countries where it is, the word citizen is less used, as far as I know, in UK, the word community, for example, is used much more. In France also, it's not called citizen science, but it's called science participative, so participatory science. But nonetheless, the name doesn't itself is of course important, but it's not the only answer. It doesn't make it so that they become more inclusive by default. It's a very important point. I agree with you, and I wish there were better ways of calling these activities that could sound more inclusive.
Thank you very much for that remark, and for anticipating as well the discussion that we will have. I'd like to go now to Laurie and to see what you take away from the other presentations and the way it fits with the researcher's perspective. And should you wish to also share a few thoughts in addition to the question that we've got in the chat.
Yeah, I really wanted to react to that, actually. Can I do that directly?
Absolutely.
Maybe
absolutely.
making links to our presentation, because it's really important to talk about that, because most public engagement activities are meant for privileged publics, and they are made in places where a lot of people would not dare to enter, within the university wall, within places that are representative of highbrow culture, and it's really complicated. So there's been a lot of interesting research about that. Emily Dawson, who is a researcher in the UK, she's been working on the exclusive, like unintentional exclusive character of science communication and public engagement, and it's a huge topic. And it's so, her work is really interesting because she has been going towards like the kind of publics that feel excluded from these activities, and she's been asking about their point of view about that and how they receive this unintentional exclusion, because from the inside we don't see that we're doing it. We don't see that we're excluding people. It's and also, I mean, most researchers come from privileged backgrounds as well, and they expect a particular performance from their publics. They expect publics to behave like good pupils would good students would behave, like to, you know, there is a certain expected performance, like you're meant to like listen, ask the right question, you know, have a certain bodily posture, especially when it's about children, like. And it's really interesting because so in my network we've been the students have been participating in like traditional public engagement setting organized by a university with this type of public, the type of public that you have in universities, open days, that are, you know, families that are already very aware of science and that come with their children that they want to educate, and it's a very nice public to talk to. And then we've been doing this activity when we were going for 1 month in a mall in Bristol. So we had a shop in a very popular mall in the city center. And we had an exhibition in this shop, and we stayed there for 10 days with our exhibition that was very like a very colorful, playful kind of thing. And I mean, you had all these different kind of people coming through the mall, and all the excited children coming through the shop. And in a way, it was great because we were reaching publics that we would not have reached in the university. But it was absolutely not easy for the researchers to be in these positions, because there were, I mean, I've heard a lot of things like they were feeling that they were, you know, doing childcare in a way, or and there is this kind of academic identity that you're a certain, you know, you have a certain social status, and it's actually completely put in at risk by this kind of different contexts and different people and different type of publics, but it was not easy for them, but I think it was an extremely valuable experience in terms of, you know, understanding what is your place, what is your role as a researcher in society, and what are the real people out there as well, you know. So yeah, I think it's I don't know if I've answered the question, but I think it's a incredibly important topic.
Thank you so much, Maud. Do take it away. I think you have already mentioned the democratic right and conceptualizing of engagement as a something that all have a right to. So I'm curious to continue the discussion.
Thank you. And also in that light, the term citizen is pretty exclusive, because not all people are citizens when you or are citizens in the country where they reside at that moment, for example. But I think this is very interesting that this topic comes up, because it also connects, I think, a lot of the things that were also said by Loren and by Marcia, because Marcia was bringing up this notion of meaningful public engagement, I think, at your last slide. And this is also very much about that, meaningful to whom, and it's quite a challenge, because it has to be meaningful to people from very different backgrounds, different worlds, also already among the participants in all kind of activities, but also among the researchers themselves. And I think that's what you also illustrate very nicely now again, Loren. And what I was also thinking about, that's not really maybe related to this, but I was interested, is that you brought up that in your project it was compulsory for all PhDs to do public engagement, and you also stressed well, that how that worked out, and it was very interesting. I was interested to hear that once people have done it, they want to do it again. That's very recognizable also for me. And also, well, what the fellows in our network call the public engagement paradox, that everyone at certain points is saying, well, that's great that you do that, but for your career, it's a disaster, you know, this kind of thing. But for the compulsion part, I was wondering, the fellows in my network, they say, we never want it to be compulsory, because then it will be just another tick box exercise. You run the risk of all kind of perverse incentives, and I would be interested to hear how you see that, because from an organizational level, many of my policy advisor colleagues are like, okay, we want to make it compulsory, and it will be in the reward and recognition system, you know. And I see that researchers themselves, and those are the advocates, the huge stars and fan public engagements are not people who don't like it, but they say, don't make it compulsory. And I was interested because for you, your project, it seemed to work.
Yeah, so it's absolutely, it's a huge debate, isn't it? This thing of like compulsory and incentive, and I mean, I don't think it's a good solution in the end to make it compulsory, because I mean, you know, most of the things that researchers do are not compulsory, if you think about it. But it is strongly valued in terms of advancing your career. You publish papers not because it's compulsory, but because, or you participate in conferences because it's something that is valued in terms of advancing your careers. But the problem is, I mean, at the moment, it's not, public engagement does not have this status at all. So I think, for example, in the context of Europe, it was interesting to make it compulsory at a certain level, because it meant that the experience of all these PhD students in terms of producing their academic identities as young researchers entailed to do public engagement. And then now, like most of them beginning their like postdocs and, you know, researchers' careers, they have this in their identity of researchers. It's already there. And so it means that it will be different and it will contribute to a change of culture, especially in their fields. Because I mean, it's a field, most of them do like very fundamental physics, theoretical physics and stuff like that. It's like a field where it's not only not only very seldom that people do public engagement, but also it's really not seen as a good thing at all. So I think in particular context, I don't think it should be like generalized, but I think in particular context, it can be really valuable. But yeah, the problem is that basically you have, the problem is arriving to a point where public engagement would be a part of the researcher's work as much as publishing, conferences and all that.
Yeah, I don't know whether that came across very clearly in also what I was trying to say, but that's indeed why I think has been beneficial or still be beneficial for us to connect public engagement so closely to our open science program, because its reward and recognition movement is also part of that same program. And I think that is quite promising because, well, these kind of topics that we are discussing now are immediately connected to that part, and seeing public engagement as just a part of academic work is actually what the fellows are emphasizing all the time. That will be very crucial to include that in new systems for reward and recognition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just once again to say to our listeners, please become contributors yourselves by indicating if you would like to take the floor. Let us know in the chat, and the floor is yours to ask a question to our three speakers.
Can I ask a question to Marcia? So sorry, I haven't.
Sure, and that maybe can get also others thinking about what they might like to build on.
Sorry, so I haven't taken on the occasion to react to your to both of your presentation that were really interesting, and also it's really interesting to see like the different point of views. I think it's really valuable. And Marcia, so you said in the beginning of your presentation that the processes you were talking about were also adapted to like research that was like not applied research. So that was something that made me curious. If you want to just talk a little bit about it.
Yeah. So that's where it becomes difficult for sure. I have been working with researchers, for example, working on high nuclear physics, that they will first tell me, look, what we do here is definitely not of interest to the general public, but not only, they also feel like it's really interesting because there is this thing that the fact that there is a lot of interest in public engagement and also lots of funding towards public engagement, they're kind of disappointed because since they don't feel concerned, but they see there is a lot of attention towards this, it's a kind of, yeah, it's a kind of double complaining. So we are not concerned, but then this is a way of favoring applied research because there's a lot of funding towards public engagement. That's something interesting for them. So once you manage to go beyond this and you start maybe reflecting with them about, I remember when I was talking with these researchers, I was in a place called Frascati, which is just outside Rome. And it's a huge campus in the middle of a relatively small city in the outskirts of Rome that is completely sealed. So you cannot get in, you cannot even cross it if you're not part of this research center. Yeah, it's not at all integrated. It has basically, apart from a few activities when there is the European Researchers' Night, there is absolutely no connection at all with the environment around this place. So what I usually do is, the first step is really to get researchers to start thinking about how this bubble basically they are in can be better maybe connected to at least the environment around them. And focusing on environment is always a good key. For example, this research center in this small city has a particle accelerator that consumes more energy than probably the whole region of Lazio altogether. So these kind of things is something that researchers, of course, don't think about, but they can have a huge impact on the environment in general and the environment around them. So these cities, there are lots of urban legends going on about what is going on in this center, and power cuts that maybe are due because of all the energy they consume there, etc., etc. So this would be the most basic level, let's say, at least giving some thoughts about how what they do can be made a bit more interesting, or at least explained to people around them. But then what becomes more challenging is going one step forward and actually see how these communities could be involved in the research they do. So not just being taught about what is going on in the research center, but also maybe have a say about what is going on. And that's where it becomes really difficult. Of course, if there is already some fear about explaining, you can imagine about involving. And that's where your approach needs to be really strongly tailored to the research that is going on. I cannot give you general examples, but what we did in the past was really to sit down with them, look into the research they're doing. Even the most theoretic research can have one day some kind of impacts on applied research, on applied innovations and developments. So that's mostly what we do with them. And we try to even just ask the people around this research center to explain their understanding of what is being done there. And often in this type of processes, there are some really interesting ideas that come up that researchers, some kind of elements that researchers have not thought of. And that's where you need to go to the third step, that is finding some common ground. So it's not just a knowledge sharing process. It's not just getting a deeper understanding of each other. It really becomes something that that can change things for both people involved. It's just one example I've been involved in, but it was really curious to me because, it was really like a sort of, we often talk about science as an ivory tower. So for me, that research center gave me this kind of feeling, and seeing how it was completely disconnected from everything that was around them. I don't know if anyone else has any other experience that relates to this, would like to share, not only the speaker, but also the participants. And I saw, Maud, that you were nodding, so maybe you also had experienced something similar.
Yeah, well, but only if not one of the participants wants to share something, because we've been talking so much. But I indeed did recognize also something about what you said, and what it brought up with me it's also that researchers very often then have the ideas like, okay, but my topic or whatever is so fundamental or so difficult or so far away from people's lives. But doing these kind of activities, not only for the researchers, also for the audience that's involved, also is very much about science and research more in general, what it is to engage in scientific or academic thinking, what the value can be, what the drawbacks of that can be. And I see that on that level, very often, there can be very meaningful engagement as well. So it's not only about, well, their particular societal issues or personal issues that people are dealing with, but it's also an opportunity to talk about what this thing called science actually is and could be. So well, that's also what I thought when I was listening to your example. We just did our project ourselves in the with the libraries in our city, but not in the central library, but also in the suburbs and also in the less privileged suburbs of our city. And there was a lot of talks about issues that are pressing in people's lives. We had trained researchers also to be very open and not so much talk about it. And a lot of the discussions turned out to be about how do you actually do this as a researcher? What is it then that you do? And I read this, and what kind of things do you read? So I think that's also a very interesting element of doing this kind of project.
Would anybody from the audience like to take the floor to share? Just feel free to open your mic, of course, and very happy for you to contribute. If not, I wanted to raise a little question that we often came across in GRACE. As you know, our implementing organizations have been working on several of the RRI keys, if we can call them based on that terminology. So also gender equality, science education. So I wondered if our speakers would be so kind to reflect on maybe the possible connections or synergies between these keys that might inspire also the GRACE project partners. How do any examples of interesting collaborations across these dimensions of responsible research and innovation? That's my my question.
I don't know if Marcia and Maud, you have something. I might have something to share about gender equity in relation to public engagement, but Marcia, if you had something, maybe go first.
Go.
Okay. So yeah, we've talked about it when we were preparing the talk. So in Europa, in the network I'm working in, there's been something weird that happened from like the fact that public engagement was made compulsory, and it was not anymore an individual problem, but it was an organizational problem, a collective problem. Everyone had to participate in it, and there needed to be a collective and organizational dynamic in terms of public engagement. And this collective dynamic, this organizational dynamic, was mainly, if not exclusively, led by women. So we had on 16 PhD students, it were like a third of women, and they were the only ones doing this work of holding this collective dynamic of public engagement together. And it's something, so I mean, of course, it's a small number of people. You can say it's well, in this context, those were a context where only the women were more interested in doing that. But I mean, it was a bit disturbing. So I began questioning this and discussing with people, and it led us to have a very interesting conversation about the role of women in organizational dynamics. And I mean, there is also a lot of research about in academia, how women take on more work that is of service to the community of academia. They do more teaching work, they do more service work, they do more emotional work. And during this same time, the men that are more focused on their own research are the ones publishing more papers and advancing their academic careers, and while not doing things that are benefiting to the academic community. So I found it really interesting, because I was like, okay, so does it mean that we are making public engagement compulsory in order to make research more inclusive socially? But in the end, the people that will bear the weight of this compulsory dimension will be women, and will be already the people that are already more discriminated and that already have less chance to advance their careers. And in the end, maybe it will be something that will be detrimental to women's career. So it's kind of an issue, and especially so in the debate of making public engagement compulsory, it's also something that we have to think about, is that as soon as something becomes something collective, something organizational, it will weigh more on some people, and it will weigh more on the people that are already the more discriminated in academia.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. I think it's a debate that has been going on since a really long time. I remember almost 10 years ago, well, not 10, but it was at least 2013 or 14, being involved in a big European funded project that many of you probably know, that was called RRI Tools, which, by the way, represents, it's a huge database that has a lot of really interesting resources there. I will put the link in the chat soon. But and I remember at the time we were just starting to use all these RRI pillars. Even the wording RRI was kind of still weird, and I think it's still a difficult term to use. And we were thinking about like these ideal scenarios of RRI. So what would be something that fulfills ticking all the boxes? So where you have ethics, open access, gender, etc., and we struggled quite a lot with that. I think what we can do is try our best to take care of all these aspects when doing public engagement. One example I was thinking of while I was listening to Christina's question and Laurent's reflections is about, again, I'm going back to this citizen science approach that has become also very fashionable recently. And there are different shades that you can, in a way you can do citizen science. It's not because you do citizen science that automatically you are doing good public engagement. There are different ways you can do this. So of course, in the citizen science you set up, you can be careful at being very inclusive. I don't think gender is of course a key pillar, but I would really prefer to focus on inclusion in general, so not just gender. And this is a huge issue. You really need to put a lot of effort in making sure that different parts of population are represented there, even those who do not feel comfortable, like Laurent was saying, with going to certain places. The drawings I showed you from the citizen engagement activity we did in Transform, we had an additional challenge. Not only we reached out to marginalized publics, but we were in the middle of the pandemic crisis, so we had to do this online. So we can do another workshop entirely on the challenges that we had to face to make it work. But there are ways. I think if you pay attention, if you try your best, and if you rely on local associations who can collaborate with you, you can at least try to pay attention to inclusion and making sure that people taking part are not just the usual suspects. You can take care of open access. You can make sure that all the data you collect are actually open and accessible to everyone so that people can reuse them and they're not just used to publish a scientific paper that will be behind a paid wall. You can take care of public engagement. You can make sure that there is a concrete impact of the citizen science that is done. There are some really interesting examples of citizen science projects that have led to real changes within neighborhoods, within a street, a square, or a whole city. So you can make sure that this becomes a meaningful exercise, not just a data collection exercise. You can reflect together with all participants around the ethics of what you're doing. Making sure that so you can reflect before starting your project about what are your principles, what is your vision, and what are your grounding principles there, and make sure that these are shared with all those who take part. And you can have a huge science education component in activities like citizen science, for example. Most of the participants taking part, they will definitely learn something new. It seems like young people, especially taking part in citizen science projects, their interest towards science grows a lot, including scientific careers. I still don't know how this can be shown, but that's what I heard. But also for adults, there is a very interesting example of a citizen science project where people started including the fact of being involved in this citizen science project in their curriculum. Which was something we absolutely did not expect. It was really interesting. So I think it's really not in the way. It's really in the way you set things up. It requires a lot of effort to take care of all these pillars, of all these elements, which are really important. You can go from maybe caring just about one, because that's the key priority to you, up to caring about all of them. But it does require a lot of reflections and willingness to do so.
Thank you so much for that reflection, Marcia. And maybe I could just pass on the floor to Maud for a final comment or remark on this topic before going on to some final notices.
I'll try to keep it short, because I recognize a lot of what you're saying. So leaving aside the gender issue, at least largely, because we in the fellow network, for example, it's a point of attention that we have both male and female, and also from different disciplines and different backgrounds, also in the sense, and that's what the point I would like to bring in. To involve people who have been first-generation students themselves, who may now have become researchers, but also who are working at the university in all kind of other jobs. And that's especially, we have been doing some projects involving people, and especially focusing on that background with our school project. So I was talking about the science hub that we have, that has the school project. I think that's a very interesting way to do that. That can be people with different cultural backgrounds as well, socioeconomic backgrounds maybe, and it's a very interesting way. And school projects, they tend to have the association of science education, but in many of our school projects, it's mostly these kind of things we want to get across. Like there are people with different backgrounds also doing research, and that makes a difference for the kind of conversation that you were having. So these are also ways trying to be more inclusive, and that's of course just one aspect of the RRI keys. But we have the same things going on, of course, with open science, which many people think is like the follow-up, perhaps, for RRI, at least in terms of funding. That's the same thing. You have a lot of different elements going on, and they are related. And I think it's very good that people who are now working in RRI and people who are working on using the terms open science are aware that they're actually in the same field and also use each other's resources.
Thank you so much for that. And final round, I think, was full of connections. I think we could explore each in a webinar of its own, but our time has come to an end. As it was mentioned already in the chat, I think all of our speakers are keen to share some of these links and resources with you. So keep an eye out for the thank you email after your participation for those links. The presentations and other materials will be up on our project website. So more for you to explore afterwards. A final couple of notices from our side. I'll just quickly share my screen with you to say that this was part of a series of webinars that make up our final conference. And our upcoming webinar next week, same time, same place, a different Zoom link, however, is on this topic of gender equality plans, with a particular focus in research funding organizations. And the week after that, if you would like to continue to hear more about public engagement, we are zooming in on the research funders' perspective. As we heard from speakers today, also this more official reward recognition, sometimes compulsory aspect of the webinar of public engagement is quite important. So do join us then. Do visit the link that we've posted in the chat to find out more about the series of events and the topics you can expect. And yeah, continue the conversation. It's a big thank you from both Marie and myself for your participation today, to those of you joining to explore these topics, but also to our speakers. And I think that concludes our session for today. Thank you for your participation also in the chat, and do stay posted to further GRACE events until the end of the year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
For organizing.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Enjoy the afternoon. Thanks once again.
Thank you.